videos on what I call Catholic Church Crisis and Solution. And today I want to address the press conference that Bishop Bellesario had regarding a commission to review sexual abuse cases in the Anchorage diocese. He has done this for the Juneau diocese as well. I like to start out with a little act of contrition. Oftentimes, when we critique and criticize, and I am guilty of this, we can come across as knowing it all. And I just want to say I don't. And one of the temptations in my personal faith life is to want to be accepted in my community, and so I don't really want to step out of the bounds. And this is the challenge to the critique and to stand up for people that have been hurt, that one has to call out the structure that may abuse or continue to have a culture of abuse. So I am challenged to present a video like that. I was even nervous to put the original videos up, that people might see this as me being anti-Catholic or just an angry person. So that in mind, I have goals. I have a goal for these videos and these reflections, and basically it's to shed light on the clericalism that is still prevalent in the Catholic Church. And this clericalism has like I said, a culture of protecting the abuser. And I want to create a transparency so that more people are not alienated from their faith and their tradition of faith and their community of faith. And I'd like to restore health to that community, and I can't do it alone. So that said, I read the original article in the Ketchikan Daily News, and it was called 14 Named in Alaska Misconduct Review. And this is a well-prepared press conference that the bishop had. He had named three or four people to a review board, and they pulled all the files of sexual abuse cases in the Anchorage diocese. And right there, you have to stop and you have to say, okay, wait a second. There was a collection of files, 14 people over 50 years. So somebody knew the files existed. So what often you have to deal with Bellesario and perhaps any of these bishops is they don't say what they don't want you to. They're not going to talk about what they don't want to talk about. And what's startling is there's no questions in this article, but the more telling thing is what isn't said. There's things that are alluded to. So let's just say they review these files, and this commission says, okay, and they make the public these cases. They don't say which cases were adjudicated, meaning whether there were charges filed, or whether victims were settled with, payments were made. None of that is even expressed or detailed. But the most telling silence, really, from my perspective, is really covered up with a line, and the line is really kind of interesting. The line is, the findings may be made with this commission that through gross negligence, those who, through gross negligence, failed to adequately respond to sexual misconduct. The bishop said no such findings were made. Now, this is all legalese, but what he's saying there is no superiors were found culpable in this. This is stunning and laughable on its face. Think about that. 4 of these perpetrators were transferred from different dioceses. Most likely, even like Pat Hurley, transferred from back east. They were transferred here out of a need for priests, but also probably because they had been accused in another diocese. And Alaska was a place to send them. It's the Siberia of America, you know. Let's get them out of our hair here. And the fact that no bishops or superiors or lay personnel, staff, knew of these crimes is not only unlikely, it's impossible. So for the bishop to say that no person other than the individuals named in the cases is through gross negligence failed to adequately respond to the sexual misconduct, you just have to stop yourself right there and say, well, this is essentially a lie. And it is interesting that Bishop Bellesario actually served in the Anchorage diocese until recently, and one of these cases was while he was there. This is the one in 2015, I believe there's one. Anyway, so I just want to point that out, and you have to grapple with that. The other part that is not said, and he once again alludes to it, but doesn't go into any details, and that is that he says that, you know, most likely none of these cases would have happened in the current church, but he doesn't really say why. Is there some substantial authoritative change? Is there a formation change in how priests are formed? Is there a diocesan oversight board that takes each cleric and each lay staff person and reviews their qualifications? I know they do background checks now, but background checks certainly don't prevent, they can help, but they don't prevent sexual abuse. We can see that even in secular abuse cases. But essentially nothing substantively has changed at the church governing level. And this is the glaring silence of the press conference. I don't know how he can call that transparent. The other part that is missing is that in the cases of settlement, in the cases of litigation with victims, oftentimes the church takes a hostile stance. They litigate these. They fight the victim. We don't get any sense of how much financial cost this has accrued to the laity, the people in the pews. And so in some ways what the Catholic Church does is the people in the pews pay. You know, Fairbanks filed for bankruptcy. I will predict that probably the Juneau diocese will eventually have to file for bankruptcy, but the people in the pews essentially are complicit, as I would say, because they pay the bills. And in some ways they're complicit, but they're also victimized by this negligent managerial process or culture, this clericalism. And you might say, well, and the bishop's claiming, well, we're beyond that. I just don't believe it. I see it in my own cleric, in my own priest, at my own parish, in very subtle ways, which I've articulated. And I'll give you an example. The example is that the diocese has an established set of policies regarding how staff and volunteers are to behave, their roles, their responsibilities, so on and so forth. A very explicit document, 2 documents. They're online. You can read them. I volunteered at the church level for a advisory council, and I was never trained in these policies. But the minute I expressed anger, the policy was whipped out in front and said, hey, you didn't follow X, Y, or Z policy, Hey, wait a second. I was never trained in this policy. Matter of fact, our priest didn't even refer to the policy. And I've asked others, were you trained in the policy? Other volunteers, other formal staff, people that are paid? No. So if the current culture is that you don't even train your staff in the policies and procedures, and then you hold them accountable, that is a form of abuse. And what that is, once again, as I've tried to articulate in other videos, is a culture of abuse. And there will be, I predict sadly, with a great sigh, that abuse will happen again. Sexual. And part of the reason I'm making these videos is to try to create a culture of transparency so that it doesn't happen again. Taking ownership of what I call kind of the BS that was, this was the smoke and mirrors. And to Bellisario's credit, he's trying. But you have to remember, he's a man that was deeply entrenched in the clericalism from his early days. He's been a cleric his whole adult life. He doesn't know anything else. And this is really evident in any personal interactions you have with him. He is partly responding to the greater crisis at a church level and trying to think, well, if I just sweep the dust out of the attic here, I'll create this transparency. But he's really not being transparent, and I just want to point that out. And we need to be aware of that so that we don't get sucked into this feel good. Well, we made these people, we're through it all. Many claims by bishops have said, oh yeah, we've got this under control. So with that, I will conclude this video, and we will hope and pray that the church can become transparent and share some of its authority, find and give some oversight to people so that abuse does not continue in all its form. There's a spectrum of abuse that I described.